The King of Elfland's Daughter by Lord Dunsay. Part 8. Chapter 16. Orion Hunts the Stag. There passed 10 years over the fields we know, and Orion grew and learned the art of oath, and had the cunning of thrill, and knew the woods and the slopes and the vales of the downs, as many another boy knows how to multiply figures by other figures, or to draw the thoughts from a language not his own, and to set them down again in words of his own tongue. And little he knew of the things that ink may do, how it can mark a dead man's thoughts for the wonder of later years, and tell of happenings that are gone clean away, and be a voice for us out of the dark of time, and save many a fragile thing from the pounding of heavy ages, or carry to us over the rolling centuries even a song from lips long dead on forgotten hills. Little knew he of ink, but the touch of a roe deer's feet on dry ground, gone 3 hours, was a clear path to him, and nothing went through the woods but Orion read its story. And all the sounds of the wood were as full of clear meaning to him as are to the mathematician the signs and figures he makes when he divides his millions by 10s and 11s and 12s. He knew by sun and moon and wind what birds would enter the wood. He knew of the coming seasons, whether they would be mild or severe, only a little later than the beasts of the wood themselves, which have not human reason or soul, and that know so much more than we. And so he grew to know the very mood of the woods, and could enter their shadowy shelter like one of the woodland beasts. And this he could do when he was barely 14 years, and many a man lives all his years and can never enter a wood without changing the whole mood of its shadowy ways. For men enter a wood perhaps with the wind behind them. They brush against branches, step on twigs, speak, smoke, or tread heavily, and jays cry out against them, pigeons leave the trees, rabbits pad off to safety, and far more beasts than they know slip on soft feet away from their coming. But Orion moved like thrill in shoes of deerskin, with the tread of a hunter, and none of the beasts of the wood knew when he was come. And he came to have a pile of skins like oath, that he won with his bow in the wood, and he hung great horns of stags in the hall of the castle, high up amongst old horns, where the spider had lived for ages. And this was one of the signs whereby the people of Earl came to know him now for their lord. For no news came of Alveric, and all the old lords of Earl had been hunters of deer. And another sign was the departing of the witch Zoroonderel, when she went back to her hill. And Orion lived in the castle now by himself, and she dwelt in her cottage again, where her cabbages grew on the high land near to the thunder. And all that winter Orion hunted the stags in the wood, but when spring came he put his bow away. Yet all through the season of song and flowers his thoughts were still with the chase, and he went from house to house, wherever a man had one of the long thin dogs that hunt, and sometimes he bought the dog, and sometimes the man would promise to lend it on days of hunting. Thus Orion formed a pack of brown long-haired hounds, and yearned for the spring and summer to go by. And one spring evening when Orion was tending his hounds, when villagers were mostly at their doors to notice the length of the evening, there came a man up the street whom nobody knew. He came from the uplands, wrapped in the most aged of clothes, which clung to him as though they had clung forever, and were somehow a part of him, and yet part of the earth, for they were mellowed by the clay of the high fields to its own deep brown. And folk noticed the easy stride of a mighty walker, and a weariness in his eyes, and none knew who he was. And then a woman said, "It is Vand, that was only a lad." And they all crowded about him then, for it was indeed Vand who had left the sheep more than 10 years ago to ride with Elfric, no one in Earl knew whither. "How fares our master?" they said, and a look of weariness came into the eyes of Vand. "He follows the crest," he said. "Whither?" they asked. "To the north," he said. "He seeks for Elflands still." "Why have you left him?" they asked. "I lost the hope," he said. They questioned him no more then, for all men know that to seek for Elfland one needed a strong hope, and without it one saw no gleam of the elfin mountains, serene with unchanging blue. And then the mother of Niv came running up. "Is it indeed Fan?" she said, and they all said, "Yes, it is Vand." And while they murmured together about Vand and of how years and wandering had changed him, she said to him, "Tell me of my son." And Vand replied, "He leads the quest. There is none whom my master trusts more." And they all wondered, and yet they had no cause for wonder, for it was a mad quest. But Niv's mother alone did not wonder. "I knew he would," she said. "I knew he would." And she was filled with great content. There are events and seasons to suit the mood of every man, though few indeed could have suited the crazed mood of Niv. Yet there came Elvric's quest of Elfland, and so Niv found his work. And talking in the late evening with Vand, the folk of Earl heard tales of many camps, many marches, a tale of profitless wandering, where Elfric haunted horizons year after year like a ghost. And sometimes out of Vand's sadness that had come from those profitless years, a smile would shine as he told of some foolish happening that had taken place in the camp. But all was told by one that had lost hope in the quest. This was not the way to tell of it, not with doubts, not with smiles, for such a quest may only be told by those who are fired by its glory. From the mad brain of Niv or the moon-struck wits of Zen, we might have news of that quest which could light our minds with some gleam of its meaning, but never from the story, be it made out of facts or scoffs, told by one whom the quest itself was able to lure no longer. The stars stole out, and still Vand was telling his story, and one by one the people went back to their houses, caring to hear no more of the hopeless quest. Had the tale been told by one who clung yet to the faith that still was leading Elvric's wanderers on, the stars would have weakened before those folks left the teller. The sky would have brightened so widely before they left him that one would have said at last, "Why, it's morning." Not till then would they have gone. And the next day Vand went back to the downs and the sheep and troubled himself with romantic quests no more. And during that spring men spoke of Elfric again, wondering a while at his quest, speaking a while of Lyrazel, and guessing where she had gone, and guessing why, and where they could not guess, telling some tale to explain all, which went from mouth to mouth till they came to believe it. And spring went by, and they forgot Elfric, and obeyed the will of Orion. And then, one day, as Orion was waiting for the summer to go by, with his heart on frosty days and his dreams with his hounds on the uplands, Rannoch the lover came over the downs by the path by which Vand had come and walked down into Earl. Rannoch, with his heart free at last, with all his melancholy gone, Rannoch without woe, careless, carefree, content, looking only for rest after his long wandering, sighing no more, and nothing but this would have made Vira come to have him, the girl he had sought once. So the end of this was that she married him, and he too went roaming no more on fantastic quests. And though some looked to the uplands through many an evening, till the long days wore away, and a strange wind touched the leaves, and some peered over the further curves of the downs. Yet they saw none more of the followers of Elveric's quest coming back by the path that Vand and Rannoch had trod. And by the time the leaves were a wonder of scarlet and gold, men spoke no more of Elveric, but obeyed Orion his son. And in this season Orion arose one day before dawn, and took his horn and his bow, and went to his hounds, who wondered to hear his step before the light was come. They heard it all in their sleep, and awoke and clamoured to him. And he loosened them and calmed them, and led them away to the downs. And to the lonely magnificence of the downs they came, when the stags were feeding on dewy grasses, before men are awake. All in the wild wet morning they ran over the gleaming slopes. Orion and his hounds all rejoiced together, and the scent of the thyme came heavy with the air that Orion breathed, as he trod its wide patches, blooming late in the year. To the hounds there came all the wandering scent of the morning, and what wild creature had met on the hill in the dark, and what had crossed it going upon their journeys, and whither all had gone where the day grew bright, bringing the threat of man. Orion guessed and wondered, but to the hounds all was clear, and some of the scents they noted with careful noses, and some they scorned, and for one they sought in vain, for the great red deer was not on the downs that morning. And Orion led them far from the Vale of Earl, but saw no stag that day, and never a wind brought the scent that the anxious hounds were seeking, nor could they find it hidden in any grass or leaves. An evening came on him, bringing his hounds home, calling on stragglers with his horn, while the sun turned huge and scarlet, and fainter than the echoes of his horn, and far beyond downs and mist, but clear each silver note he heard the elfin horns that called to him always at evening. With the great comradeship of a common weariness, he and his hounds came home in the starlight. The windows of Earl at last flashed to them the glow of their welcome. Hounds came to their kennels and ate, and lay down to contented sleep. Orion went to his castle. He too ate, and afterwards sat thinking of the downs and his hounds and the day, his mind lulled by fatigue to the point at which it rests beyond care. And many a day passed thus, and then one dewy morning, coming over a ridge of the downs, they saw a stag below them feeding late when all the rest were gone. The hounds all broke into a joyous cry. The heavy stag moved nimbly over the grass. Orion shot an arrow and missed. All these things happened in a moment, and then the hounds streamed away, and the wind went over the backs of them with a ripple, and the stag went away as though every one of his feet were on little dancing springs. And at first the hounds were swifter than Orion, but he was as tireless as they, and by taking sometimes shorter ways than theirs, he stayed near them till they came to a stream, and faltered and began to need the help of human reason. And such help as human reason can give in such a matter Orion gave them, and soon they were on again. And the morning passed as they went from hill to hill, and they had not seen the stag a second time. And the afternoon wore away, and still the hounds followed every step of the stag with a skill as strange as magic. And towards evening Orion saw him, going slowly along the slope of a hill, over coarse grass that was shining in the rays of the low sun. He cheered on his hounds, and they ran him over 3 more small valleys, but down at the bottom of the third he turned around amongst the pebbles of a stream, and waited there for the hounds. And they came baying around him, watching his brow antlers, and there they tore him down and killed him at sunset. And Orion wound his horn with a great joy in his heart. He wanted no more than this, and with a note like that of joy, as though they also rejoiced, or mocked his rejoicing, over hills that he knew not, perhaps from the far side of the sunset, the horns of Elfland answered. Chapter 17. The unicorn comes in the starlight. And winter came and whitened the roofs of Earl, and all the forests and uplands. And when Orion took his hounds afield in the morning, the world lay like a book that was newly written by life. For all the story of the night before lay in long lines in the snow. Here the fox had gone, and there the badger, and here the red deer had gone out of the wood. The tracks led over the downs and disappeared from sight, as the deeds of the statesmen, soldiers, courtiers, and politicians appear and disappear on the pages of history. Even the birds had their record on these white downs, where the eye could follow each step of their treble claws, till suddenly, on each side of the track would appear 3 little scars where the tips of their longest feathers had flicked the snow, and there the track faded utterly. They were like some popular cry, some vehement fancy that comes down on a page of history for a day and passes, leaving no other record at all except those lines on one page. And amongst all these records left of the story of the night, Orion would choose the track of some great stag not too long gone, and would follow it with his hounds away over the downs until even the sound of his horn could be heard no longer in Earl. And over a ridge with his hounds, he and they all black against red remnants of sunset, the folk of Earl would see him coming home. And often it was not until all the stars were glowing through the frost. Often the skin of a red deer hung over his shoulders, and the huge horns bobbed and nodded above his head. And at this time there met one day in the forge of Narl, all unknown to Orion, the men of the Parliament of Earl. They met after sunset when all were home from their work. And gravely Narl handed to each the mead that was brewed from the clover honey. And when all were come, they sat silent. And then Narl broke the silence, saying that Alveric ruled over Earl no more, and his son was Lord of Earl, and telling again how once they had hoped for a magic lord to rule over the valley and to make it famous, and saying that this should be he. And where now, he said, is the magic for which we hoped? For he hunts the deer all his forefathers hunted, and nothing of magic has touched him from over there, and there is no new thing. And Oth stood up to defend him. He is as fleet as his hounds, he said, and hunts from dawn to sunset, and crosses the furthest downs and comes home untired. It is but youth, said Guick, and so said all but Threll. And Threll stood up and said, He has a knowledge of the ways of the wood and the lores of the beasts, beyond the learning of man. You taught him, said Guick. There is no magic here. Nothing of this, said Narl, is from over there. Thus they argued while lamenting the loss of the magic for which they had hoped. For never a valley but history touches it once, never a village but once its name is a while on the lips of men. Only the village of Earl was utterly unrecorded. Never a century knew it beyond the round of its downs, and now all their plans seem lost, which they made so long ago, and now they saw no hope except in the mead that was brewed from the clover honey. To this they returned in silence. Now it was a goodly brew. And in a while new plans flashed clear in their minds, new schemes, new devices and debates on the Parliament of Earl flowed proudly on, and they would have made a plan and a policy, but Oath arose from his seat. There was in a flint-built house in the village of Earl an ancient chronicle, a volume bound in leather, and in it at certain seasons folk wrote all manner of things, the wisdom of farmers concerning the time to sow, the wisdom of hunters concerning the tracking of stags, and the wisdom of prophets that told of the way of earth. From this, Oth quoted now 2 lines that he remembered on one of the aged pages, and all of the rest of that page told of hoeing. These lines he said to the Parliament of Earl as they sat with the mead before them at their table. Hooded and veiled with their night-like tresses, the fates shall bring what no prophet guesses. And then they planned no more, for either their minds were calmed by a certain awe that they seemed to find in the lines, or it may be the mead was stronger than anything written in books. However it be, they sat silent over their mead, and in early starlight, while the west still glowed, they passed away from Niall's house back to their own homes, grumbling as they went that they had no magic lord to rule over Earl, and yearning for magic to save from oblivion the village and valley they loved. They parted one by one as they came to their houses, and 3 or 4 that dwelt near the end of the village on the side that was under the downs were not yet come to their doors when, white and clear in the starlight and what remained of the gloaming, they saw, hard-pressed and wearied, a hunted unicorn coming across the downs. They stopped and gazed and shaded their eyes and stroked their beards and wondered. And still it was a white unicorn galloping wearily. And then they heard, drawing nearer, the cry of Orion's hounds. End of Part 8. If you have been enjoying this audiobook, please take the time to subscribe. It would really help the station. If you could also like or leave a comment or share this station with other friends, that would be great. Thank you.